August 21, 1983, Manila. A commercial airplane is approaching what was then known as Manila International Airport. On board is a Filipino politician who has spent 3 years in exile. His name is Benigno Aquino Jr., but most Filipinos know him simply as Ninoy. For years, he had been one of the strongest political opponents of President Ferdinand Marcos. He had been imprisoned. He had faced a military trial. He had been sentenced to death. He had eventually been allowed to leave the Philippines for medical treatment in the United States, and now he was coming home. He knew the danger. His family knew the danger. His supporters knew the danger. But Ninoy believed that the Philippines was reaching a point where remaining safely abroad was no longer enough. As the plane descended toward Manila, he reportedly told journalists traveling with him that he had to return because he believed the country needed him. Then came the words that would become forever associated with his name. The Filipino is worth dying for. Minutes later, Benigno Aquino Jr. would be dead. But the story of Ninoy Aquino did not begin on an airport tarmac. It began 50 years earlier, in Tarlac. Benigno Simeon Cojuangco Aquino Jr. was born on November 27, 1932, in Concepcion, Tarlac. He came from a prominent political family. His grandfather, Ferdinand Aquino, had fought in the Philippine Revolution and the Philippine-American War. His father, Benigno Aquino Sr., had also been a major political figure. Politics was therefore not something Ninoy discovered late in life. It was part of the world into which he was born. But Ninoy's first great passion was not politics. It was journalism. At just 17 years old, he became a reporter for the Manila Times. It was an extraordinary beginning. He was young, ambitious, and already attracted to stories larger than himself. Then history gave him an opportunity few teenagers could imagine: the Korean War. In 1950, Ninoy went to Korea as a war correspondent. He was still a teenager. But the experience exposed him to something that would shape the rest of his life: the reality of war. He was no longer simply writing about politics from behind a desk. He was watching soldiers fight, suffer, and die. His reporting earned recognition, including the Philippine Legion of Honor. And while journalism gave him his voice, politics would soon give him a stage. In 1954, Ninoy played an unusual role in one of the Philippines' most complicated conflicts. He helped negotiate the surrender of Hagbalahap leader Luis Turok. He was only 21. That episode demonstrated something that would become central to Ninoy's political identity. He was willing to talk to people his opponents considered enemies. The following year, he became mayor of Concepcion, Tarlac. He was 22. Later came the provincial government, and in 1961, Ninoy became governor of Tarlac. Reporter, war correspondent, negotiator, mayor, governor. Each position made him more visible, and each one made him more dangerous to established political rivals. In 1967, Ninoy won election to the Philippine Senate. He was 34. At the Senate, his reputation grew rapidly. He was young. He was energetic. And he was becoming one of Ferdinand Marcos's most outspoken critics. The political relationship between the two men was complicated. Both were ambitious. Both understood the power of public speaking. Both understood the importance of political machinery. And both understood that the Philippines was changing. But by the late 1960s and early 1970s, the disagreement between them was becoming much larger than personal rivalry. It was becoming a struggle over the future of the country. The Philippines in the early 1970s was deeply divided. There were student demonstrations, political unrest, economic problems, insurgencies, and growing opposition to the Marcos administration. President Ferdinand Marcos argued that stronger government was necessary to preserve order. His opponents saw something more dangerous: the gradual destruction of democratic institutions. Then came September 1972. Marcos placed the Philippines under martial law. Ninoy Aquino was among those arrested. The politician who had spent years criticizing the government was suddenly behind bars. A man who once stood at a Senate podium now lived inside a military detention system. For Ninoy, prison was not simply a physical confinement. It became a test of his beliefs. Imagine the psychological weight of it. A politician who had once commanded crowds, now sitting alone. A man who had once written newspaper stories, now became the subject of stories written by others. The military government accused him of serious crimes. Ninoy denied the charges and challenged the legitimacy of the proceedings. The years inside prison changed him. He experienced isolation. He suffered health problems. And eventually, he faced the possibility of execution. But Ninoy's most famous confrontation with death may not have happened in a courtroom. It happened inside his own mind. At one point, he went on a hunger strike. He was prepared to risk his life rather than accept what he regarded as an unjust process. His health deteriorated badly. Eventually, the hunger strike ended. But the conflict continued. Then came a dramatic development. In 1980, Ninoy suffered a serious heart problem. He was permitted to travel to the United States for medical treatment. It was supposed to be temporary. Instead, it became exile. America was supposed to be a place for recovery. For Ninoy, it became something else: political base. In the United States, he underwent medical treatment and began rebuilding his public life. He gave speeches. He wrote. He spoke with journalists. He met Filipino communities. And he continued criticizing the Marcos government. But exile presented Ninoy with a difficult question. How could he influence the Philippines from thousands of kilometers away? The answer was communication. He became a voice for the opposition. But something else was happening at home. The political situation was deteriorating. The economy was under pressure. Public confidence in the government was weakening. For Cory Aquino, Ninoy's political struggle had a deeply personal cost. She was not simply the wife of an opposition politician. She was the wife of a man whose life could be taken from him at any time. And yet the family continued. 3 years passed. Then Ninoy made the decision that would define his legacy. He would return. The decision seems almost impossible to understand from a distance. Why return to a country where you had already been imprisoned? Why return when your opponents controlled the government? Why return when you knew that your life could be in danger? There were several reasons. Ninoy believed the political situation required a dialogue. He wanted to reconnect with Filipinos. He wanted to help create a peaceful political transition, and he believed that the opposition needed someone willing to take the risk. His family and supporters were deeply concerned. The danger was obvious, but Ninoy chose to go. August 1983, he prepared to travel back to Manila. The journey would take him from the United States through Asia and eventually toward the Philippines. The man who had spent 3 years outside his homeland was now going home. August 21, 1983. Ninoy boarded China Airlines Flight 811. He traveled under an assumed name for security reasons. As the aircraft approached Manila, reporters and members of his party knew that the landing would be closely watched. There were security personnel waiting. There were journalists. There were cameras. And there was an atmosphere of extreme tension. The aircraft landed. They escorted Ninoy down the stairs, and then a single shot shattered the silence. On the cold steel of the stairway, only his glasses remained. A nation would never see clearly the same way again. On the tarmac that day, Ninoy Aquino was assassinated, along with Rolando Galman, who was also present at the airport. The Philippines had just experienced one of the most shocking political assassinations in its modern history. Almost immediately, questions spread across the country. How did a homecoming become a national tragedy? What happened to the other man on the runway that day? Did the first explanation answer every question? Or was there more to the story than first told? An official account was presented on national television. But in homes across the country, many questioned that version. And on the streets, that version was met with widespread doubt. The events of that day became a matter of national discussion. In response, a fact-finding board was formed in late 1983, the Agrava Board. Its task was to review records, hear witnesses, and piece together what happened that afternoon. The investigation produced 2 reports. One came from Justice Corazon Agrava. The other came from the other members of the board. The findings became part of a much larger legal and political battle. The Supreme Court's later records describe how the Agrava Board conducted extensive public hearings and how the Aquino and Galman case resulted in criminal prosecutions. But the story did not end there. In 1986, the Supreme Court examined evidence concerning the handling of the case. According to its 1986 resolution in GR number 72670, the court adopted findings that the earlier proceedings had been influenced by pressure from the then administration and described the handling of the case as having been stage-managed in a predetermined manner. It is important to distinguish between 2 questions. First, what happened on the airport tarmac, which, according to Agrava Board findings adopted by the Supreme Court, was found to be a military conspiracy on the service stairs, not the initial version. Second, who ultimately ordered or organized the assassination, which is not automatically the same question, and which the Agrava reports did not conclusively answer. Those are not automatically the same question. A responsible documentary should not turn historical uncertainty into certainty. What we can say with confidence is this: Ninoy Aquino was assassinated. The official explanation was widely disputed. The investigation and subsequent legal proceedings became deeply controversial, and the assassination transformed Philippine politics. Then came something the government could not easily control: the funeral. Ninoy's body was brought home. His family opened the doors, and ordinary Filipinos began arriving. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. The crowd grew. People came from different social classes and political backgrounds. Some carried photographs. Some carried candles. Others simply walked. The man the government had attempted to silence in death was becoming louder than he had ever been in life. The funeral became more than a funeral. It became a large public gathering, a public expression of grief, and over time, a peaceful expression of shared sentiment. The color yellow, which supporters had used to welcome Ninoy home, became associated with the movement that formed around his memory at that time. The streets became a shared public space. People who had once remained quiet began to speak openly. Who exactly was Benigno Aquino Jr.? Was he a perfect hero? No, he was a politician, ambitious, from a powerful family. He was a symbol for many, yet each description tells only part of the story. No single label captures his full role in the events that led to February 1986. There is a paradox in Ninoy Aquino's story. He did not live to see the movement he inspired reach its height in February 1986. He did not become president. He did not see the return to elections at EDSA. His chair remained empty, but his absence shaped the choice a nation would make. The story that began with imprisonment and exile continued through his widow, Corazon Aquino, who stepped forward as the opposition candidate. He was not there, but what he stood for was present at every corner of EDSA. Ninoy had a choice. He could remain in America and continue speaking from a safer distance, or he could return to the Philippines in August 1983. He chose to return, knowing the risk. Courage, in his case, was not about winning, but about being present. Because sometimes, the most important part of a person's story is not how they die. It is what they were willing to stand for while they were alive.